afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Council study session of Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. I now call the meeting to order. Would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Madam Clerk, will you please do the voice roll call?
Thank you. Councilmember Chavez?
Here.
Councilmember Gameros? Councilmember Harlan?
Here.
Councilmember Harper?
Here.
And note he's participating via Zoom. Councilmember Reynolds? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Mar? Here. Mayor Stevens?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one study session item. What we're going to do is hear first from the staff who's going to present this item. Ms. Molina, right? You're leading the charge here?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Does the city manager need to introduce you, or can you just go?
It's up to the city manager.
Okay. All right, anyway. But she's going to be the main person here doing the presentation, so that's terrific. So we're going to hear from Ms. Molina, and then we're going to open it up to public comments. Normally you get 2 minutes for a study session, but it doesn't seem like we have that many people here, so I've got no problem having it be 3 minutes. So let's do 3 minutes for the public comment, and then we'll have questions and comments, things of that nature by the council. And we could just stay on discussion mode, council, and if you have something to say, just get my attention, and I'll give you the floor, and we can take it from there. But so, Ms. Molina, we're in kind of a casual environment, so I could probably even call you Carol, but I'm not going to do it. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. It is my honor to bring forth to you tonight fiscal year 21-22 mid-year presentation. Tonight, we're going to be going over some of the year-end highlights from the prior fiscal year, provide you an update where we're at in the current fiscal year. We'll also be bringing forth some adjustments that will be coming forth to you, to the City Council, in a future council meeting. We'll review the general fund balance, and then we'll end the presentation with the budget calendar. For our current last year's highlights. Last year was the very first year, full year, where we experienced the full impacts of the pandemic. As you may recall, in 2021 adopted budget, we took multiple reductions, staff furloughs, operating reductions, capital projects also were reduced in order to stabilize the general fund. As that, the general fund ended with a positive balance of about $29,000 for a total of $154.7 million. We were able to use the ARPA funds to justify revenue losses for the general fund, support small businesses through a grant assistance program about $2 million, and balance the emergency expenses that were incurred during COVID. We did not use any reserves in 2021, and we received an unqualified clean opinion by independent auditors. For an overview on where we're at in the current 21-22 general fund budget. As you may recall, the City Council approved a total budget of $197.9 million, of which $154.4 is in the general fund. Of the general fund, 53% is dedicated to the city's public safety departments and supports 651 full-time positions citywide. The current year's budget reinstated all the reductions that were taken in 2021 as a result of the pandemic. In the first quarter economic indicators, we start seeing some really positive signs for the economy. Our housing numbers are up by 1.4%. Building permits are up by over 9%. Our national unemployment rate is down to 4%. Retail sales across the United States have increased 13% from the prior year. Our real gross domestic product also increased almost 7% in this last fourth quarter of 2021. However, we still need to keep an eye out on the economy. Inflation is still high, about 7%, and as I'm sure everybody's experiencing, the gas prices at the pump is increasing. In 21-22, our general fund expenditures include $154.4 million. $145.4 are for our ongoing expenditures, salaries and benefits, operating costs across all departments. We have fully implemented the funding of the CAN, the 5% towards our capital improvement, and 1.5% towards our IT infrastructure, for a total of $154.4. Due to a certain number of vacancies in salaries and benefits, we're experiencing some vacancy savings of about $1 million and some operating savings to the tune of about $200,000 projected by June 30th of this year. And we will continue to fully fund the CAN to assume about a $1.2 million in general fund savings by the end of this year. Our revenues are very healthy. As anticipated when we were reviewing the adopted budget about a year ago, we're seeing property taxes continue to increase. 49.6 is what we adopted. We're looking at 49.7. Our sales tax is increasing, as you can see across the United States, where retail sales have grown dramatically. So we're projecting about $5 million more by year end in sales tax funds. Our hotel tax is also coming in slightly higher than we had anticipated. However, this revenue stream is just not yet back to pre-pandemic levels. The city's prior pandemic amounts for TOT hovered around $8.5 million a year, so we're not quite there yet. Our cannabis fees and permits are definitely holding line. We anticipate about $3.3 million. We're projecting $2.5 million. We do have other revenues, about $25.1 million. These include parks, parking citations, and one-time, such as strike team revenues, coming in at $28 million, almost $3 million higher than we had anticipated. As a result, we're not anticipating using reserves yet again. We do anticipate using about $3 million use of ARPA funds, which are eligible, to about $156 million in total revenues. Coupled with the expenditure savings of $1.2 million, we're anticipating a net gain to the city's general fund of about $2.8 million. As you may recall, in September, we held a strategic planning retreat where the City Council identified 3-year council goals and priorities. They included strengthening the public safety and improving quality of life, achieving long-term fiscal sustainability, recruiting and retaining high-quality staff, diversifying, stabilizing, and increasing housing, advancing environmental sustainability and climate resiliency. At that retreat, City Council requested staff to expand our capacity for recruitment and retention. As everyone has heard, we have had high numbers of vacancies throughout the year, hovering around 50, depending on which payroll cycle you're narrowing at. By recruiting and retaining high-quality staff, we'll continue to slowly improve the city's current efforts in recruiting and retaining talent. To that end, in December, we brought forth multiple adjustments in compensation to certain classifications to the market that the City Council approved. We are pleased to report that just recently, the federal government approved funding from ARPA to retain and attract staff, especially due to the pandemic. These new guidelines that were just released by the United States Department of the Treasury allow the use of ARPA funds to pay premium pay for essential workers, restore positions, restore employment, funds pay reductions or work follows, maintain compensation levels to prevent layoffs, and provide worker incentives, including reasonable increases in compensation. These guidelines give us the ability to realign positions, leverage existing positions, revamp the recruiting process, and they also provide reasonable increases in compensation. Last year, in March 2021, the city was awarded $26.2 million from ARPA. We received half, 13.2. We're expecting to receive the additional 13.2 next month in April. City staff is recommending that the use of ARPA funding be used towards one of your goals, to recruit and retain high-quality staff, as approved by the City Council. In the area of strengthening the public safety and improving the quality of life, coming to you March 15th at a City Council meeting is public safety. As you know, the City of Costa Mesa is a full-service city. We're comprised of a police department and a regional counterintelligence service, a fire and rescue department, emergency operations center, ambulance and paramedic transportation program, and public safety access points, in essence, a 911 communication center for both police and fire. Both departments provide 24/7 operations and have done so throughout the entire pandemic. At this point, I will transfer this over to the police department, the police chief, Ron Lawrence.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. As you know, I've been your police chief now for about 6 months, and it's been an exciting 6 months. We've done a lot of great things, which I'm going to bring to you next week. In my assessment of the police department, we're making a lot of progress to rebuild and move into the future and make sure we keep Costa Mesa safe. And part of that overlay are these positions here that I want to talk about and request for the police department, which are essential to making sure that we get things realigned and that we do things in an effective and efficient manner for Costa Mesa. The first position there you'll see is to ask for a police sergeant, and this is to better address crime and enhance presence at our prime retail locations. You may recall in the fall of last year, there was not only statewide but even nationwide a significant increase in retail crime at major retail areas. You didn't hear about that in Costa Mesa because we did a concerted effort to strategically make sure that we were protected, and it didn't come easy, but it certainly was a success, and I'm proud of our team for doing that. But this overlay of a supervisor would allow us greater supervision in those areas. The next one is to strengthen the emergency management team and functions. We currently have an emergency services administrator. This would move that position to a manager. This person answers not only to the police chief, but to the city manager and the fire chief on very crucial areas such as disaster mitigation, obtaining grants to ensure that we've got the right equipment, emergency protective equipment for our city, and not just the police and fire departments, but all cities and departments in the city, to include working with department heads on a continuity of government of operations plan. The third one is upgrading a records administrator to records and property and evidence manager. That's a mouthful. Currently, we have a police lieutenant, a sworn police lieutenant, who oversees not only records and property and evidence, but he also oversees the 911 center. This upgrading this position would allow a non-sworn professional staff member to oversee these units, thereby allowing me to realign the police lieutenant to sworn duties and enhance the police department. The fourth one there you'll see is to convert a part-time crime scene specialist to full-time. This helps our officers in the field to prevent them from spending time on crime scene investigations, but it's also a retention tool. We recently lost a part-time crime scene investigator to a full-time position to another city, and so training this type of unique and specialized position really requires them to be full-time and not part-time. And then the last one you'll see there, to alleviate the workload in the crime scene unit associated with discovery requests, we're requesting to convert two currently vacant part-time records technicians to a full-time community services specialist who can help us with Public Records Act requests and different discoveries orders that come out of our court system. With that, I'll turn it over to my big brother, the fire chief.
Thanks, Chief. Mayor Stevens, members of the council, thank you. And I just want to note how great it's been with the new police chief stepping in. He's been such a great partner right out of the gates. And we just have a lot of great things that are going to continue to happen. So outstanding partner, and I'm thankful for that. As far as the fire and rescue department, we've been doing quite. There we go. No, I appreciate the heads up. I'll just briefly recap. I just want to first thank Mayor Stevens and the council for this evening, but I wanted to just acknowledge my partner, Chief Lawrence in Public Safety, and just the great impact he's already had and the great partner that he's been from the moment he arrived, and we're appreciative for that. And we have a few things we'll discuss tonight that have a crossover, and it's the blending of some of the resources that we have. As far as the fire and rescue department goes, we've been active, obviously, through the past few years of COVID, doing quite a bit of different things. And when you work through the numbers of challenges that we've been working through, provides an opportunity to look at some of the gaps. Our approach has been to take a look at all those different areas that we have. We certainly have been methodical and thoughtful in how we've approached our services. EMS plays an extremely important role for us and for the city. When we talk about emergency medical services, it accounts for about 65 to 70+% of the calls that we run on. And so with that, we've been slowly building our EMS program, and we do need some more substantive backing to that with the enhancement of the ambulance transportation program. And what that's done over the course of the time that it's been here, it has generated cost recovery revenue that we initially anticipated to be about $3 million annually. We're now on course this coming year to broach $4 million. And our thought with that all along was that we were going to have to put funds back into the system, and that includes for the equipment. We have ambulances that we've had now that we're in the process of purchasing new ambulances. And then the system itself, that cost recovery element, which includes not only the ambulance billing components that we work with some other partners on, but the system and the quality assurance for that. And so we have an emergency medical services coordinator that does a lot of our licensing, does a lot of the certifications, and does a number of things. But right now we're at that point where we need an additional hand to assist. And through COVID, it became apparent that we needed that. So we have had an EMS captain. This was a fire captain from the floor who served in the capacity of a paramedic and has been working with us over the course of the past 2 months, and just in that short time has had some very significant impacts. And that resource for us is an ask that we have tonight, and we don't come for an ask without looking for something that's actually going to help fund it, and that's as we look to the ambulance transportation program and what the intention was. So that's what we have brought forward today as far as that position goes. The next position that you see is a telecommunications manager. And historically, this has rested within the police department. What we've looked to do, because there's obviously a nexus there and we interact on a range of things, the dispatchers handle police, fire, rescue, all emergencies. And so one of those components that we've worked together, Chief Lawrence and I have looked, what are some areas that we can work on refining how we actually do our dispatching and emergency communications. Right now, the fire and rescue department doesn't really have a direct part in the chain of command within the system of the dispatch. It's just the way that it's been set up as it's evolved. But there's a lot of different areas that we need to go through just to make changes. And so one of the changes is this addition of the telecommunications manager. It would be a civilian position, and it would be shared with police and fire. And so, and I'll let Chief Lawrence speak to it in a moment here, but it would allow us to have both police and fire direct communications within the chain of command and help manage and identify the strengths that rely on having your own communication center. So that position is included here under the fire and rescue department, but that would be a shared endeavor. And then the last item that we have on is it's what we call phase 2, and I think we'll get into a little bit tonight, but it's those hard to fill positions that we have throughout the city and trying to retain the best and the brightest with the city of Costa Mesa. And so it's bringing this not only within the region, but just within the city, bring our fire marshal at the same level as our billing division supervisor, that lead. And then as far as the inspectors go, we've already addressed the billing inspectors within the city. That was the phase 1. This phase 2 brings the fire inspectors up to that same level. So that's what we have before you tonight as far as these positions, but I would like to just hand it over to Chief Lawrence to speak briefly about the Telecommunications Manager because I think it warrants such. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. That was well said. The 911 center has traditionally rested within the police department, and the fire department was almost a customer, if you will. But the reality is our 911 center dispatches for both police and fire, and their calls, our calls and the fire calls are remarkably different, although they're often intertwined. If you think about a traffic collision, their role and our role are different roles, but we're both still going to the same collision. So having one center makes sense. But having a shared governance model is the new model here. And fortunately, you have two chiefs, a fire chief and a police chief, who get along and have a vision of having the 911 center be governed and policy oversight and operational oversight by both the fire department and the police department. This model really is forward-thinking, and it will help address a lot of concerns in making sure that we're not clunky, we're not slow, but we're very quick to respond, not only in the chain of command, but to our customers who call 911.
And then in this last piece, and I'll turn it over to turn it back to Carol, but just in this element of the resolution update, as we talk about the different pieces here, I just wanted to acknowledge the reimbursements. There's a large portion, at least for fire and rescue, and there's a component for police as well. But in terms of the reimbursements that we receive as a fire and rescue department, our mutual aid throughout the course of a year varies from year to year, but it's a large portion of our overtime budget that becomes a dialogue throughout the course of the year. $1.2 million, over $1.2 million has been reimbursed for this past 2021 year. I think it's good to acknowledge that. And also the acknowledgement that during COVID, over the course of the past 2 years, there's a lot of city funding and reimbursements that came back, not just to fire and not just to police, but to the city as a whole. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I would turn it back over to Carol just for her additional comments on this.
Thank you, Chief. So this resolution update would allow the city manager and the finance director to appropriate these expenditures that these departments would be incurring that would be net neutral. In essence, as those revenues are received to support the expenses that our teams have gone out to support other jurisdictions, we would be able to immediately provide those departments with the budget appropriation to cover those costs. This will be also brought forth to you on March 15th, and we would like to permanently make it part of the budget resolution moving forward. Our other goal that was set forth in September was the ability to recruit and retain high-quality staff. With these slides, I will turn it over to City Manager Lorianne Farrell-Harrison for her presentation.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Chief Lawrence and Chief Stefano. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. So this evening, we're giving you an update on the city's financials, how we think the financial performance will be of the city, given where we are right now in March, almost 9 months in, but have closed up to 6 to 7 months at this point and done our analysis. So we can tell that the financial outlook is better than budgeted. So we're really excited about that. When we had the strategic planning retreat back in September, we discussed a number of challenges that the city is facing, and we promised to bring some things back to you for consideration at mid-year. So that's basically what you're seeing this evening. Obviously, this evening you won't be taking any action. The study session is intended to give you an update and to share some recommendations with you that we'll be bringing forward on the 15th, with the hopes that we could have some dialogue tonight and get some questions from you and your direction on basically the recommendations that we're putting forward. One of the things that we've been discussing for the past couple of years since I've been your city manager is the management of the city's resources. And so we have the financial resources, which I believe we've been managing very well with your assistance and with your leadership. One of the few cities in the region, I think one of only two, that hasn't dipped into reserves even during the pandemic, despite the pandemic, and despite providing services 24/7 and excellent services at that. We also have to manage the city's capital resources, our infrastructure, our city facilities, our streets, our equipment and technology. We have a long way to go in that area. As you know, we're a bit behind, and so we've been strategically putting money aside for that. And then, of course, we have our human resources. And the human resources, in terms of the staffing at the city, that's really the conversation that we're having with you this evening. And so in order for us to have a well-run city and to achieve all of the goals that you've put forward and to have a state-of-the-art city and team working on cutting-edge solutions to all of our social challenges, we have to be more competitive in the market, and that's something that we've been discussing quite, at length. And I want to thank you for your support in this regard. You've been extremely supportive of staff. We're not quite there yet, but we're moving steadily to that. And this is yet another piece. It's another piece of the puzzle that we wanted to talk to you about so we can make additional progress. This will not solve all of the issues, but I do believe it's a great next step. Our chiefs have looked at what they need in the short run to kind of stabilize certain parts of their operation and enhance, and so have the other departments. And so with that, I wanted to cover some of the non-sworn, non-public safety recommendations that we have for you for mid-year for your consideration. And so one of the things that we've talked about is our recruitment arm in the Human Resources Office of the City Manager's Department is one that has been very creative in trying to fill positions as quickly as possible. It's an ongoing challenge given the fact that we have unprecedented retirements. I think the last 2 years we've had more retirements than we've ever seen in the city's history. That's most government agencies, and so we need to re-engineer how we recruit, expand our relationships with existing universities, colleges, even at the high school level, and just making the government sector a destination and Costa Mesa a destination. I think we have a great reputation for being creative, doing great work with this council and under your leadership, and so that's been good. I think there are certain classification and compensation issues that present challenges that we need to address, and so we're going to make some recommendations along those lines. I do know that in the past, due to recessions, we've made some changes structurally that we have no control over. But then there are some that we do have control over that don't require a change in state legislation. We don't need the state of California to legislate a change. And so those are the ones, some of the ones that we're bringing forward to you this evening for your consideration. And so on the top here, you'll see 3 positions that we're seeking for non-public safety, 2 in the Human Resources Office in order to re-engineer our recruitment efforts, use some more technology tools, establish stronger relationships with universities and colleges, as I mentioned, and have more of a centralized and very dedicated human resources recruitment and retention and training function. We've been developing Costa Mesa University, which we're hoping to launch very soon, a full curriculum that would be 12 months for all employees that are new to the city to sort of graduate from. I'm improving some of our leadership training and things of that nature, and we need additional staff to do that. We're thinking a human resources administrator and an analyst could help us achieve those goals. As you know, Costa and her team work around the clock effortlessly, especially during the past couple of years with COVID, and I just wanted to really stop and thank them for their efforts. They go to great lengths to make sure we have real high-quality recruitments. They're recruiting for police officers, I don't know that there are other recruiters in any other industry that has to have the breadth and depth of a team in government for a full-service city. You have to have the skills to be able to bring in a firefighter, a police officer, an engineer, a maintenance crew leader, someone who can work on the city's fleet, an accountant. The skills are so diverse, and understanding the qualifications that folks need, the minimum qualifications, the training, the expertise, understanding the succession ladder, those are all skills that are really key, and our human resources team has that. We just need to build it out. So we're seeking 2 additional positions there. And then for our finance department, which has done a stellar job in managing the city's finances with very few staff, a senior accountant to be able to round out that team. So there's 3 positions there. And then we have a series of part-time positions that we usually have a good amount of turnover in. It's hard to keep people in these positions. We train them, they move on to full-time positions in other cities, much like what Chief Lawrence mentioned. We need to stabilize some of these functions, have that stability, that reliability of having personnel available to do these jobs. And so we have in these 4 areas between community services, and also in the budget office, either changing classifications to a higher level in order to be able to fill positions, or combining a couple of part-time positions in order to get 1 full-time, in one case, 3 part-time positions to get to a full-time position. So small financial impact, but a huge impact in terms of work productivity and efficiency. And so we're asking for, in net, it would be 3 additional positions after these conversions have taken place, but will go a long way in helping departments achieve their goals and your goals as well. In the area of hard to fill, you did approve back in December a series of classification adjustments. As you know, we've had a policy of trying to get to as close to median compensation as possible. I think our metric at some points in time has been about 5% below the median. That's not a sustainable practice. If we want above median work production, if we want above average creativity, above average work ethic and dedication, above average talent, we need to be at a minimum at average compensation. And so we still have some classifications that are 10, 15, 20% below the average compensation of our peer cities. And so we will be bringing forward a second round of classification changes where we would be bringing those to market. And again, we're not bringing them above market considerably or to the top quartile or the top quintile, but to be at least in the ballpark and be in the average compensation category. And so those adjustments will be coming to you as well on the 15th. That's not all of the positions. These are some of the more, the ones that have been the toughest to fill or where we're really at risk of losing individuals. There's been turnover in those positions. In some cases, we've had to do multiple recruitments and we still can't fill those vacancies. And so we'll be bringing that to you as well. There's an estimated fiscal impact of $175,000 in the current fiscal year because we're 9 months in, about $700,000 annually with the savings that we have of $2.8 million that we're projecting. In addition, we have the Federal American Rescue Plan funds that can be used for things just like this, retention, incentivizing employees to stay in the public sector, especially during these challenging times. We think this is a prudent approach and something reasonable to do. We try to come to you slowly, steadily, in a very methodical way. You can see that we focus on incrementally building the organization back and stabilizing these areas. So these aren't radical recommendations, if you will. There is much more need than what we're presenting, but this is what we feel we need at this time to get a head start on next fiscal year and achieving the goals that you've set forth last September and that are ongoing as well. And then here, I'll just finish this piece and then turn it back over to Carol. In case you're wondering, well, with these changes that you're recommending, where are we in terms of where we used to be during the Great Recession? As you can see, back in fiscal year 2009, 2010, we had 611 full-time equivalents. We're still 13% below that, 81 FTEs short of what we had pre-Great Recession. And so even with the changes that we're recommending here, we're not anywhere close to where we were before the Great Recession. And with that, I'll turn it back to Carol.
Thank you, Lorianne. I'll go ahead and present to you the general fund overview, our fund balance. So 18-19 marked the last fiscal year that we did not have the pandemic. We ended 18-19 general fund with $51.5 million. In 19-20, that last quarter of the fiscal year is when we started to feel the impacts of the pandemic. We still maintained our reserves, and in fact, we came in a little bit higher. 2021, you can see we came in still in the black for about $29,000. We're still projecting in 21-22 to maintain our fund balance, reserves intact in the general fund. For our budget calendar, before you tonight is a mid-year study session to provide you the financial updates and where we ended last fiscal year. March 15th, we'll be bringing forth some mid-year adjustment requests as presented to you tonight. April 26th will be the first time we'll be coming to you for the proposed 22-23 budget with May 10th. On June 7th will be the first public hearing for budget adoption of the operating budget and the CIP with an alternative date of June 21st. I did want to take a moment as we wrap up to thank staff. Acting Assistant Finance Director Jeannie Fortune stepped up to fill Jennifer King's role in overseeing accounting, payroll, and treasury, and Anna Baca stepped up to the budget manager position. Both positions were very crucial these last few months to ensure we were able to bring these numbers to you tonight. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
So why don't we hear from the public, and then we'll go to council. So I'll open it up to the public. Remember, I'm letting people talk for 3 minutes, so we'll give you a 1-minute warning. We'll go for the people that are in the chambers first, and then if there's anyone on Zoom after that. Mr. Taboda, you have the floor, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Thank you. It's good to be back in chambers. FIPAC, Finance and Pension Advisory Committee, has a subcommittee, budget subcommittee, and yesterday the city manager and the finance director, we had a Zoom meeting with them. Oh, thank you. Thank you again for that meeting. Lisa Buchanan, Wendy Lease, and myself are on that subcommittee, although Wendy couldn't join us yesterday. That's good news. As Carol, the finance director, presented, revenues are up about $8 million, projected to be up $8 million based on 6 months of actuals through mid-year. And no reserves, which is something that FIPAC didn't want to have used to begin with, and then only about half of that ARPA money being used this year, and some of it can be used in the subsequent years. At the meeting, you know, I had raised, and FIPAC had raised issues with headcount about a year ago at the mid-year, and then in the budget for this current year in that discussion, FIPAC had raised concerns about headcount also. So I put together a couple quick charts as of after our meeting last night. I didn't realize that what was new from our meeting yesterday with city manager and finance director was the headcount request. I had looked at the staff reports, but that was not in the staff report. So this is just something I put together. It shows back in 08, 09, the 611, which was the adopted budget. The actuals were less than that, 582. Fast forward to the current year, 530 has been adopted budget. Best I could tell, based on the 530, there was 54 vacancies, so the actuals as of today, give or take, is about 476. I always like to look at actuals as well as the adopted, but the difference here is that chart that was presented a minute ago shows the 611 and coming down 13%, but a lot has changed in the last 10 years. 2022 is not the same as 2012. And I guess I got the clicker, so I just looked at salaries, full-time salaries. 08, 09 with that 611 people. Actually, it was 582. Actuals, salaries were $47.1 million. Today, with around 460 people last year, 44 million. So a lot less people, but not a lot less salaries. Now, obviously, there's salary increases. Everybody's getting a raise every year or every other year whenever the negotiations are held with the various unions. So that's understandable that salaries are going to increase. And the missing link here that I don't have, quite frankly, is the revenue has also increased since the 08-09 timeframe to the current. But I just want to say when that chart is being shown, so, well, we used to be at 611 and now we're a lot less than that. Yes, but salaries haven't changed that much. And that's the dollars and cents in the budget that has the impact. It's not the head count, it's the dollars and cents that have the impact. Next one, unfortunately, I don't have salaries and benefits here. That's what you really want to look at. This is
Mr.
just
Kubota?
This is just,
So-
what, I got 1 minute?
No, you see, here's the problem. I'm sorry, we didn't give you a 1-minute warning.
Okay, well, I talk slow, I guess.
So why don't you take about another 30 seconds?
Okay, so one of the elements of benefits to everybody's knowledge, I suppose, is pension. The pensions back in the 12-13 timeframe, when we had a lot less headcount, was 13.8 million. Today, it's projected, this is a projection, of 31.6. That's a 129% increase. So what staff shows you is the 901,000 of the increased cost on an annual basis for the headcount. That's going to increase. But that's a snapshot. Here's a couple other snapshots. What I think council needs to do is take a look at the full picture. And what I asked for a year ago, asked for yesterday, was a 5-year forecast. Let's do a 5-year forecast. What's the total impact of these salaries? What's the other needs and commitments the city has? Fold into that. Not just look at salaries and headcount in a vacuum or just as a silo. You got to look at the whole picture together. Thank you.
Thank you, great job. Does anyone else in the chambers from the public wish to speak? Madam Clerk, do we have anybody on Zoom?
Yes, Erin McCall, please.
Mr. McCall, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erin McCall, and I am a part of the Community Grants Subcommittee, and I just wanted to talk about the budget as a moral document. When we're looking at the investments for the next 5 years, I want us to make sure that we are prioritizing looking at the changes that Costa Mesa is going to be going through, and then, making sure that the investments reflect that. One of the key things that, is very important in my day job and also for the young people of Costa Mesa is addressing the climate crisis that we're in, which includes things like extreme heat and also like access to water. We need to make sure that the budget has inclusion for a climate action plan and that that's reflected. But also as we're looking at, the budget surplus and the ARPA funds, I want us to think about what we learned during the pandemic, which was that some of the things that were very vital and important to the survival of the city was access to public space, was access to parks, was access to, community programs to make sure that folks had access to food, access to information about how to get treatment, and, even rent support, right? We have a real opportunity to think about how we're going to use these funds over the next 5 years. And I hope that we can design a budget that uses the surplus budget, the ARPA funds, and just, any extra money to really build our community by highlighting our parks, highlighting our opportunities for artists. We're creating the future. So we want to make sure that we're not only looking at the past, those 2009 numbers were important, especially as looking at it what happens when we have another conflict. But let's also look and craft our future. A green Costa Mesa with amazing public spaces, amazing parks, and access for everyone. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'll see you around.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else on Zoom?
No other speakers.
Okay. So I'm going to close public comment, and we're on discussion mode, so anybody can talk as long as we don't interrupt each other. Who wants to talk?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, of course. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So speaking of emergency operations and our dispatch in particular, I feel like I've heard over the last 4 years that it's both a people challenge, but also a technology challenge. And we've traditionally had a really hard time just recruiting dispatchers, period. So I understand the impetus to add additional headcount, sort of restructure the hierarchy there, but how are we thinking about those other two issues as they relate to dispatch?
Well, as council approved some of the hard-to-fill positions in the communications center, we've had success at recruiting now our 911 dispatchers. So that's some great news. Thank you to the council for doing that. That was crucial. That was a crucial next step. Very complex job, very hard to recruit for, hard to retain, and that we've seen some successes there. As technology goes, I know the fire chief's got some thoughts about their needs. We make sure to keep up with what we can as technology, new technology emerges, and we certainly update those as finances allow.
And I'll just add on, I think Chief Lawrence hit most of it. I think part of it is bringing people back. Costa Mesa used to be the emergency communications center that people aspired to come to. And with the challenge that we had as it related to salaries, benefits, that went away. So now bringing those individuals back and retaining them. But one of those elements that is critical is the technology piece and how user-friendly those elements are. And so I think those are things, some steps have already been made, and we're seeing incremental steps, but it is a large, boat to turn. But we are making progress on that, and I do see that ship turning, just continuing to put resources back into it.
Should we expect to see anything in the 22-23 budget as it relates to CAT RMS?
I think at this point, we're exploring what the best options are.
Okay.
You might see that in a 22-23 or 23-24 for sure, moving forward. The big highlight, and I want to make sure I underscore it, is the model change of the governance of the 911 center with this position, because never in Costa Mesa's history has it been a police-fire combination, and this is that shift, which makes us much more efficient, much more responsive to our customers.
Okay. And then Chief Lawrence, how many other part-timers do we have in the police department right now? It seemed like there were a number of conversions to full-time, but there's a lot of part-time employees in the police department right now.
There are, and I don't have that number in front of me, but we have, for example, some park rangers that are part-time. We have some parking aides that are part-time. A lot of them are actually pathways to other full-time positions. Many times it's young people that want to become a police officer or dispatcher, and they get into those part-time roles, and that's how we have a lot of turnover.
Okay. Yeah, it got me thinking, like, there's probably other roles too that we would have less turnover with if we were able to make them full-time. Even if in the case of like recreation's doing, we're able to collapse two positions into one. So, I mean, I think that's a good strategy overall. I know it increases the cost somewhat, but I know the labor market is tough, and the idea of having to look for people who want part-time work is getting harder. So I guess I'm just curious if there's additional opportunity there. And then to Mr. Tabota's point, seeing a 5-year forecast, I think, would be helpful as we look at, some pretty significant increases in FTEs and the associated cost, how we see that playing out, especially given that we feel good now with ARPA money and other things, but 5 years from now, making sure that we're still able to stay in the black despite hopefully not another pandemic, right? And hopefully not additional state funding, but or funding from the federal government. But let's play that out a few years so that we can see it in context, please. That was all I had. Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Gameros. And then Councilmember Harper, if you want to speak. Can you see him, Brenda? Councilmember Harper? Like if he does his raise hand?
No, she cannot.
Okay, just if you want to speak, then Don, just call out. But we're going to go to Lauren now. But
Thank you, John.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank staff for their presentations. They were very well articulated and easy to understand. My question is for the chiefs. Chief Lawrence, you had mentioned that you guys were looking at a shared governance model for telecommunications, and I just wondered if this is something that we're doing and we're kind of pioneering, or are there other cities that have done something like this and we're going to try and overlay or model what it is that they've already done?
Traditionally, most cities do have their 911, cities our size have their 911 center governed by the police department, and it is clunky. But there are a lot of agencies, a lot of jurisdictions who have a joint powers agreement, and they have a 911 center that is governed by several agencies. So there's several models out there. In talking with the fire chief and really analyzing what we need at this time, this is a great model for us to start that direction. And so it's not something new, to answer your question, but it is new for us, and it's an exciting way to be more efficient.
And Councilmember Gameros, the other piece for us, we've looked at this for quite a while, going way back. The Emergency Communications Center had an identified communications manager, and both police and fire had a piece in it. And then as positions started to get pulled away through the Great Recession, that's how it came back and landed ultimately back with the police department. And I echo the same comments. Within Orange County, in terms of the fire service, the vast majority of agencies are part of either the Orange County Fire Authority, the 24 different municipalities as part of that, or part of the MetroNet Joint Powers Authority. There's really only two right now, us and Laguna Beach, that are police fire. And so with Chief Lawrence coming in and with leadership by Lori Ann, we had looked at those options, and what those options provide is a direct pass to those different dispatching agencies that are very effective, highly effective, and regional dispatching is really what a lot of people have gone to. But with this opportunity that we have in front of us, and like I said, Chief Lawrence coming in, we thought it was definitely appropriate to take a look at this and to create this hybrid. And so we're excited to look at it. And if it doesn't work moving forward in the years ahead, we'll have some other options. But I think we're in a great place to move forward on this.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm excited to see how this works moving forward. Thank you. That's all.
Do any of the three of you have questions?
Just one quick question for Chief Lawrence. So I noticed you want to hire one new sergeant. Where would that sergeant be placed, or would it be a new team under them, or how would that work?
Well, we have a lot of resources that we can move around, but we have 3 police officers that are specifically relegated to retail theft and prevention of retail theft. But the supervision out there is what's lacking. So it would be assigned to a retail theft prevention team in our high-profile retail areas.
Okay, so essentially we'd be creating like supervision for that team directly, so you have a complete unit, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a few questions. So I don't know if this is a question that can be answered, but I just think we should start kind of thinking about this. So we have a war in Europe, as we all know. Okay, we just got out of the pandemic. We saw how that affected our budget. We have a war in Europe. How could that affect our revenue? I mean, have we thought about contingencies for, different things that might happen with respect to our country's role and how that affects supply chains and costs and things like that?
So keep in mind, as we spend in the city of Costa Mesa, the sales tax is a rate, which is why we're starting to see and experiencing over the last year such a high number of sales tax revenues. My assumption would be that the sales tax would continue to grow. Any other fiscal impact, keep in mind we also have the ARPA money. Of the $13.1 million in the current year, we aligned $6 million from the current year. We just reduced it down to $3 million. That still leaves $10 million that we could still cover if need be. As well, just as a note, we still have cannabis. So Measure Q businesses are not 100% on board yet. We know from experiences in some of our other cities, Long Beach, Santa Ana, but when the pandemic hit, their revenues on the cannabis front increased. So even to today, where we're seeing just the initial revenue stream from cannabis from the Measure Q businesses, once it's fully on board, we'll definitely be seeing more revenues at that moment in time that we currently are not experiencing. Hopefully that answers your questions, Mayor.
Yeah, it answers my question. I'm trying to figure out the link between the war in Europe and cannabis, but I'll figure it out.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
can I just pile onto that? I think there's actually been a lot of policy discussion around the need to further get off of oil and gas. And I think that's one opportunity that certainly from a city sustainability perspective, we continue to pursue electric vehicles and the extent to which we can not be dependent on global commodities. And then, I think that for me, that sort of means doubling down on all things Costa Mesa, right? We've talked about the economic development plan and the actions that we're trying to take to encourage Costa Mesa businesses and people to shop locally and all those other things. To the extent that we can sort of, again, separate ourselves from global commodities and focus here at home, I think is the priority.
Can I tag on to that
Yes,
comment?
sir, of course.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about something I know a tiny bit about, and that's oil. And a couple things I think that we miss in our conversion to electricity is 85% of power is generated today by fossil fuel, which powers your electric vehicle. So it's
Not in California.
It's a tricky thing. What is it in California?
Hold on a second. Let you make your point. She'll get.
Well, it's okay.
She can do a rebuttal.
I always love Andrea interrupting me. It's always fun.
It's all right.
So I don't know what is in California, Andrea, but I know it's significant. I know we have a power grid issue in California. So, but to John, your comments about the war, the one thing that we do know is that the fossil fuels, the price of gasoline, the price of diesel, it bleeds into everything. It inflates everything. So our sales tax will go up. Unfortunately, the cost for everybody to buy everything is significantly more, and that's the heaviest tax that we can yield on our people of lower and mid-level incomes without disposable income. So it's pretty significant. And I will share this one thing that's fascinating to me is that throughout the Ukrainian war and the Russian war here, there's not been any supply chain disruptions in the oil markets, in the oil production, and the demand is relatively the same. So we're seeing these increases largely because of really panic buying and stockpiling. And unless there is, in fact, a fundamental change in what we did in our energy policy in the U.S., that it really is slowing down our production. So it's interesting. There really hasn't been, we didn't stop buying from Russia, and they didn't stop selling. So, yeah, people ask me why the price is increasing, and that's my answer. So I just want to share that.
Thank you. Did you have a response?
37% is produced by renewables.
I'd like to see that information because I don't believe it. I don't agree with it. You're not just telling me 37% come from wind and solar, or is it hydroelectric? Where is it?
It's on the California ISO website. I'll send you the link.
I don't know. Okay.
Okay. Good.
Mayor
Well,
Stevens?
we resolved that. What? Yes, ma'am.
I did want to just add a couple of points related to your question on the conflict in Ukraine. So one of the good things about your finance team and your leadership team is that we have probably 60 years combined experience. And we have, unfortunately, been through a number of wars and conflicts that the U.S. has actually actively participated in. And so there are in addition to the tools that Carol mentioned, there are other tools that we would have at our disposal, namely immediately putting in addition to revenues and available funding in the reserves that we haven't touched, and in the $13.5 million in ARPA that we haven't touched. The first thing we did when the pandemic hit is the same thing we would do if the conflict escalates, which is we cut back on spending immediately. And that's what we did. In that last quarter of 2019, we came to you within 30 days, and we cut $10 million out of this budget immediately. And we shut every non-essential expenditure down. That would be the first line of defense to immediately protect ourselves. We would be enhancing our liquidity, which is something that the finance team is always looking at, how much cash on hand. So we would make sure that we have good liquid assets to be able to pay our bills. And then, of course, we have the reserves and all of those other things. We would be able to, make sure that over time we're diversifying our fleet. You're going to see that in the next budget. You're going to see much more diversification in the city's fleet, not as fossil fuel reliant. So Raja's really committed to that. He's coming forward with some exciting proposals, shifting our fleet as quickly as we can away from fossil fuels across departments. I mean, in public safety, we'll have to do a few pilots, which could even be fun at a small level until we start to expand. But for the non-sworn fleet, for sure, starting to reduce that reliance. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal between increasing our liquid assets and then, of course, reducing our spending. Luckily, we haven't hit our reserves, and so that would be another line of defense if we so needed. But we feel confident that we would be able to manage that along with the recommendations that we're making. We still have to be able to function, and of course, during every emergency, we're still deployed. Government services still need to be provided, so we would make sure that we could manage all of that.
So it's interesting you should say that, because what I heard from Carol is, at least in the foreseeable future, obviously inflation is bad in general for people who are trying to manage their personal finances, but it actually has the effect, the consequence of increasing the city's revenue. Okay, so you said you've been through other conflicts and wars. What are the drivers for those types of things to decrease our revenues, which would cause us to have to make the adjustments that you talked about of cutting costs?
So if we were, for example, if we were a city whose sales tax base was not very diversified, let's say we were a city that had 60 to 80% of its sales tax derived from auto sales and auto dealerships, which some cities are very reliant on that, that would be a huge hit to a city because of their specific mix in sales tax, right? If you're relying on auto sales, recession could follow a war, then yes, you're going to be hit that way. Luckily, we have a much more diversified sales tax base. We have, when fuel costs go up, that helps us as well. And so we're not reliant on just one sector, one specific industry that's completely aligned with a recession of sorts. And so we have some items in our sales tax where it's actually a contraindicator, where it actually helps us or it's not going to destabilize us as much. Usually when there's a war, property taxes stay very stable. And so it takes a couple of years for property tax to come down if they would, but our history is really good. We've looked at that for the past 10 years. We have stable property taxes. Some areas that could be hit, though, are the ones that are usually the softest ones where there's an immediate impact is anything that's really vehicle-related, like parking citations and things like that. There could be an impact on some of our other user fees and things of that nature, but we're feeling pretty comfortable that we have a good enough diversified sales tax base and we have other tools that we could, other levers that we can, and knobs that we can turn. And we'll keep a very close eye on it. There are some revenue categories that are very closely aligned with recessions and wars. We know what those are, and we would monitor those very closely. We're not seeing indicators of that now, but we need to be prepared just in case.
Thanks. Okay, I just have a couple more. I just want to comment, and I'd like to see this maybe even amplified in the presentation on the 15th. I like the link that you made, particularly this fire chief, between the positions that you're requesting and the revenue that they would create. Okay? Well, and I think it is apparent that if we're adding a sergeant that is going to be assigned to address retail theft, that would have a positive, could at least potentially have a positive benefit on our revenue. I've heard somewhere that sergeant would be, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is basically South Coast Plaza, right? I mean, you described South Coast Plaza, but you didn't say South Coast Plaza. Did I get that right, South Coast Plaza? Okay, so obviously keeping South Coast Plaza peaceful and safe is something that can enhance our revenues. So and I think as we go through, and like even the positions in HR, if we can go through and somehow, even if it's an estimate, somehow quantify how these positions will pay for themselves, because there's either a direct or an indirect driver of revenue and helping the city's fiscal health. That would be helpful, I think, to justify voting yes on the positions that you're requesting. So something to consider between now and next Tuesday. two things, and then you guys can answer it in any order. We're all sitting here lovely, and I don't know whether this is even agendized, but where are we at with the state of emergency? We're now we've got the plexiglass, but we don't have our masks. We presumably are spending less money on COVID-related expenses, which was the justification. And we get a lot of constituents that say, why are we maintaining our state of emergency? And then the last thing I'll ask is, where are we with, speaking of revenue, where are we with the 5-year plan for the golf course, which we approved in the last budget? Is that moving forward? Because that's a possible revenue generator, substantial revenue generator.
So I'll take the emergency declaration. Yes, we still very much so have a declared emergency. As you know, it's still a nationally declared emergency, state declared, county declared, and locally declared. So every level of government still has a declaration. Despite the fact that we are maskless, there are still individuals that are succumbing to the virus, as you know, that are hospitalized. There are still fatalities. And globally and nationally, and even here in Costa Mesa. And so the pandemic is still very much here, albeit at not as catastrophic, let's say, a pace, although catastrophic to the families that are still dealing with it. As a reminder, we do have $13.5 million in federal American Rescue Plan funds that we'll be receiving next month. The emergency declaration is obviously tied to that. We can use those funds through December of 2024. Luckily, we have not used those funds for recurring expenses. We've used those funds to cover the expenses that were related to COVID, which are declining, and also the small business assistance, and then reimbursing, of course, the furloughs and the $2 to $3 million in savings that we achieved from the employees taking that 5% pay cut. But the pandemic is not over by any means, and we need to make sure that we're still in a position to be able to utilize the American Rescue Plan funds. The future still is somewhat uncertain, and so we have until December 2024 to use those monies, and we plan to do that in a way that's responsible, doesn't overly burden our budget once we're off of it, but strategically uses that. And so that emergency declaration will remain in place for the foreseeable future until there's a pullback from every different level of government. We want to make sure that we have all of the resources that we need available to us in case there's a change, new variant, whatever the case may be, even something as simple as being able to still receive vaccines, testing at discounted and reduced rates through our different levels of government. That emergency declaration helps that. As to the golf course, yes, it is a revenue generating asset. We have been looking at how we can invest in that asset in the long term. We do have a separate small fund for capital improvements to the golf course, which when we talk about the budget, we should consider how we could strengthen that. I know that Raj has put together a preliminary CIP that we're still vetting. You'll be getting that when we bring the budget forward. There are some funds in there to kind of develop some short-term recommendations and then hopefully some long-term recommendations in the future. But there are some short-term recommendations that we need to address just to maintain the facility as is and make sure that it doesn't deteriorate. But then with the eye towards a longer-term plan, but we need a funding strategy to be able to achieve that as well, as the capital fund doesn't have sufficient funding in it for a longer-term solution. But we know that that's a focus for you, Mayor, and so we will be bringing something forward that helps to address that concern, or at least a recommendation for how to achieve the funding to get to that point eventually in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yep. Yeah, Councilmember Harper? Sorry, Harlan? I'm sorry.
Something happening down there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, can we pull up the slide with the police department's budget requests mid-year? I'm going to piggyback on the mayor's observation. All right. So what I really like about this slide, and I really appreciate, Chief Lawrence, your framing this, which is that here's the challenge, which, here's the problem that we're facing. The solution is obviously based in hiring. We've got columns that show the impact, the cost to the city. But as the mayor pointed out, having another column that identifies the benefit, and whether that's a quantitative benefit like revenue generation or qualitative in that I'd like to see something that goes beyond just supporting city council goals. I'd like something a little more specific that ties to, for example, improves efficiency within a specific unit, or it expedites a particular initiative that we have. Something where we really do start to focus on benefits. I mean, my long-term hope is that we start moving towards a budgeting process that incorporates metrics, so we can continue to look back to see whether or not these positions do in fact fulfill that promise, and also for us to just start gauging how we do overall in our city operations. So maybe for the next March 15th meeting, we can have, and like I said, maybe it's a column, but maybe it's just a qualitative or quantitative narrative, but something that really does focus on what the benefit is for each of these positions. I think they seem to be justified in many ways, but I think for the public, as well as for, I think, the council's consideration, we want to make sure that we are, spending our money as wisely as possible. So thank you.
And John, I had a couple of questions, if it's
I think the
okay.
chief wanted to respond, though.
Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, let's hear from the chief, and then we'll go to you, Don. I'll just say Don.
I was just going to acknowledge, certainly I can do that, Councilmember. There are a lot of factors that go into supporting that position. One thing, though, that would be extremely difficult to quantify is how much crime did we prevent?
Right.
Last fall, you might have remembered up in the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, and other cities were suffering from these mob retail theft takeovers. We didn't have it here in Costa Mesa, and that was very strategic on our part, very deliberate. And it's hard to say how much we prevented, but I'll tell you, it didn't happen here, and I'm proud of our team for that. But I think, to your point, there's a lot of good things that I can support that position with.
Okay, great, thank you.
Now, Don.
There we go. Thanks, John. I do appreciate the effort by both chiefs to detail and the city manager to detail the positions and the reasons for them. And I'm going to echo really what John and the other Harper were saying, and that is that like the graphs that Ralph Tabota presented and like the head counts that he presented, I'd love to see costs of a department trending over several years, if not 10 years is fine. And then, crime or another KPI that we can measure, because there's no way I'm going to dig into your details of your staffing and your levels and your positions and say, oh, that's wrong or that's right. You guys know that way better than I'll ever know it. But to be able to see a trend in a positive direction, whether it's crime or number of calls or response times, along with a salary increase is fine, but it helps us justify that, hey, things are safer, things are better. Yes, we're spending more. In the world I came from and come from, quarterly we look at total costs as compared to prior quarters. But we also look at maybe total costs divided by the number of units or number of customers we have. So, and then total cost compared to a budget. And I like to say I'd love to hit all those targets positively, but I'd like to hit at least a couple where we show improvement in some regard, where there's efficiencies or whatever. So I'm on the same page as some sort of simple metric that we can point to and say that things are headed in the right direction. I really am. I would love for Carol and Lorianne to take what Ralph created and what you already created with the head count and do something that's a graph that includes the benefits, the salaries, and the pensions. And I'd love to see that by the fire department, by the police department, and by all the rest combined into one. Those three different categories. I think it'd be just helpful for me to get a perspective on where our biggest numbers are, And that's the numbers that we can control, or the numbers we pay in our salaries. That's our biggest nut that we have to manage and pay attention to. I got a couple questions for both the chiefs, or maybe it's for Chief Lawrence. The concept of the hybrid, did that come from a place where you came from, Chief Lawrence? Was that Citrus Heights, or was that somewhere else you saw that hybrid version of the 911?
Well, I've seen it throughout my career. I'm sure Chief Stefano has as well. There's, as mentioned, several different models, and really drilling down on Costa Mesa and working with the fire chief, who's fantastic to work with, by the way. I think when you get two leaders that can envision what's best and what's most effective and efficient for our city, that's when you come up with some really good ideas. And that's why I want to compliment my colleague, the fire chief, because it took a lot of putting away the old thinking and thinking forward. And I think this is a good model, a good place to start, as the fire chief mentioned. But I've seen many different models, as I'm sure the fire chief has as well.
Well, I'm sorry, Chief Stefano, were you going to say something?
Councilmember Harper, no, I would just concur with that. This is a system that is out there in different places, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the people involved. Quite honestly, that's the piece. And if you don't have two organizations and the leadership, and that includes the leaders within both of our departments, you're not able to do this. And right now we have that, and we've had great leadership in the past, so it's no knock there, but it's got to happen the right time, and the timing's right, and the leadership's right. So we're in a great place to move forward with it.
Don, if I could just butt in, and just because we're on this, I just have one quick question on this. Maybe it's a longer answer. I guess I'm just kind of confused about, as a practical matter, what the difference is. So can you just walk us through it? A call comes into 911. What's the difference between how it's handled now and how it would be handled if we had this new governance model?
Well, the call coming in is going to be handled the same, because our 911 dispatchers are trained in both police and fire. But
take me all the way through, from call comes in until the person's on either police or fire, or both are on the scene. What's the change?
Well, the change is the governance of the model. Right now, we have a police lieutenant that manages the 911 center, which is misaligned. It's a sworn position overseeing 911 dispatchers who are professionally trained in both police and fire. And this communications manager will be professionally trained in police and fire communications. Our police lieutenant is a police lieutenant. He's trained to go combat crime and manage a sworn contingent. I think when it comes to the customer delivery, really this is about the fire department not needing to go through the police department chain of command to get data, to get statistics, to get information. The way the model is currently, his fire battalion chiefs have to go through my police captain and that police lieutenant to get things to happen operationally. And so the functionality being more effective will be his battalion chiefs, his fire captains, will have direct access to the 911 center, if that makes sense.
So it doesn't sound like it makes any difference in terms of a call from a call coming through, a 911 call, until there's a dispatch and there's a first responders on the scene. There's no real change in that. It's just that you can get information more thoroughly and quickly, so that you can make operational decisions?
I would just add on to it. I think what it is, like any organization, the leadership at the top piece. But for an example, if we had a working structure fire tonight, we had resources from other agencies that came into the city, and now we had stations that are open, and there was a problem with that. Let's say stations weren't covered, and someone that was not accustomed to running fire calls as a dispatcher, and we had to correct that issue, it would be one of our chief officers, as we said, to go around the backside, and by the time we got resolution, the incident's gone, and even resolving it thereafter. But what happens with this change, it allows us to have direct contact to make real-time changes at that top level. What that does at the level for the dispatchers, it starts to build more of a vested interest, both on the police and fire side. The police department has a higher volume of calls, and they certainly have calls that are intense. We have a lower volume of calls, but the complexity with the calls that we run have a range of areas. We could go from a traffic collision that involves both of our entities to a complete cut and rescue to a fire that has someone trapped. And those calls, because they don't happen every day, those complexities are things that you have to train, you have to want to train in those, and that leadership at the top helps support that and nurture those new dispatchers, as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, the challenges that we've had bringing people in. So you have that leadership at the top that enhances this team environment, enhances that top level decision-making process, real-time decision-making, and then strengthening from the ground level to the top level and everyone in between. So those are just some of the elements that will change, and I think it's good to be something that we're looking forward to. So it does have impacts all the way around.
So you think you got efficiencies out of this change, but the costs went up, and that cost is going to shift over to crime prevention? Is that another way to summarize it?
Yep, crime prevention and police operations. So the police lieutenant that currently oversees the 911 center would be reassigned, and we'd have an expert that knows how to manage a 911 center in that position. Not that the lieutenant.
Just enhancing the quality of your training and quality of your supervision is what you think.
Exactly, and management, oversight.
Got it. That was helpful, John. That was a good question.
Thank you.
What do you? I'm struggling with the deterrent to crime and how the increase in the budget deters crime specifically. Because what I learned, Chief Lawrence, thankfully from you, is it seems like there's not a lot of presence in our city amongst all our staff, our police force. It seems like there's a lot of layers, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me what percentage is really crime prevention, and crime prevention at a CVS, at a 7-Eleven, the stores that really get hurt hard, or even home burglaries. So does these increases help with that? Is there anything you're thinking on the horizon for technology that can help us with that going forward in any form and make us more efficient and make us better?
I'll touch on the technology piece next week, actually. I'm giving a presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But to answer your other question, I'll just touch on the sergeant for just a moment. And it is difficult to quantify how much crime you prevent. But take the South Coast Plaza and the Metro Point area. That's one of our biggest reporting districts. So the reporting of retail theft is coming from specific areas. So increasing the supervision there and the staffing there will have an impact on crime. It will help deter crime, which is our first objective, but it will also help us identify and apprehend suspects after the fact.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my last comment I'm going to make is I would love to see cost graphed over time, along with, it could be crime statistics, fire statistics, whatever you two experts identify as really key indicators for your departments, and kind of get that along with our trending costs and be able to show something. So, identify really where we're heading and what it looks like. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other council members want to say anything? Oh, Councilmember Reynolds?
Yes, please. Thank you. I thought this would be a quick study session, but I found it very interesting, and I think I'm going to be sad when it's over. We hear a lot from our department heads on the great work we're doing. I think we don't spend a lot of time talking about the challenges, and I find that actually really interesting. And I'd like to, as we move through the budget process, hear more of what are the challenges we need to solve in each department. I wanted to just start by acknowledging sort of how lucky we are to be in this budget position, right? To be talking about how we can invest in solving some of those challenges versus, many cities having to figure out what they can cut back on. So thank you, staff, for that. Thank you for being proactive, and also just sort of acknowledging myself that it's good to be in this position. I've agreed with a lot of the things I've heard tonight. I especially like the mayor's suggestion about kind of talking about each of these strategies and with the sort of payback or benefit that it achieves. We've talked about metrics before, and I know there's sort of challenges to kind of overhaul to create a metric-based budget, but I'd really like to see us try that. Maybe there's one area in each department budget that we can create metrics as part of our new budget cycle. there was one other comment I wanted to agree on, but I forgot what it was. I'll come back to that, I'm sure. One of the things I'm thinking about is part of this broader discussion. I know we've made some budget adjustments already through this year as we recognize our position coming out of the pandemic and really start to work on our goals. And I really appreciate the incremental approach to implementing these strategies. But for me, I feel like I'm hitting a little bit of a turning point where without having the full picture, without having that, sort of 5-year forecast, a better understanding about how all of these pieces are going to come together and where that lands us for the next budget, a year from now and 5 years from now, I'm going to start to get a little bit antsier about the bigger budget requests. I really want to have a better sense of the full picture and how future requests are going to address other goals that aren't necessarily included here. I really appreciated the comments related to, we've got a climate situation on our hands. We've got, extreme heat upon us and not a lot of solutions for that in the city. I think we've had a couple, kind of cooling centers that we pull together. We've acknowledged that we have a lack of park space and a lack of shaded park areas that are good refuges during extreme weather events. I want to know how those solutions are part of this broader budget plan, and make sure that we've got funds to invest in that, because those are real challenges ahead of us. I appreciated the comments we heard in public comment too about, what challenges did we learn from the pandemic? And the first things that come to my mind are similar to what the speaker shared. Open space, park access, community spaces, all of those things contribute to resiliency planning as well. One of the most impactful books I read, which is escaping me now, but it was about the heat wave in Chicago. When was that, 80s? I'm looking at Susan, our health expert here. Anyways, it was a study of how populations fared in response to a heat wave, and very similar populations responded differently in terms of deaths. And he found that the driving factor for populations that had few deaths, that survived, that even thrived through the heat wave, were ones that had a lot of community spaces where communities were connected, where people were connected with community organizations, where neighbors knew neighbors. And so, it feels like sort of an intangible thing. It's hard to invest in that directly, but I think those are some really important solutions that we should be thinking about, and that I'd like to see in our budget planning going forward, and that I'm going to be, wanting to make sure that there's room in our budget going forward for those things. I think the other thing I wanted to agree with that I heard some other comments on is the idea of investing in improving our response to challenges versus investing in prevention. So we heard the example of how quickly can we respond to traffic collisions. I want to prevent traffic collisions. So absolutely, I want us to be able to respond to them quickly. But I want to make sure we're, sort of doubling our investment in preventing those collisions. And there are known strategies for that. We've seen some scores for Costa Mesa versus Orange County where we're scoring a little bit lower, right? We've got a lot of through traffic through our city that creates collisions. I want to see us invest in preventing those collisions. Yeah, I think that covers most of it. So I guess, again, sort of bringing this high level, I'd like to see when we're revisiting this again, how this and future incremental requests are contributing to our big picture, and make sure that, I want to know that there's still sort of parts of the pie left, and how much pie left we have to address the things that aren't part of each incremental ask. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more.
You remember?
I always have one more. Yeah.
All right.
So I was looking at our vacancy number in the charts that Ralph shared, I counted 54 vacancies. Does that sound about right?
It sounds about right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we've got, we've prioritized, right, the need to support sort of the stability of our existing team, prioritize our ability to recruit to fill those vacancies, and then we've also got asks for new positions. 54 is a lot of vacancies to fill, and there's a lot of challenges to do that. And so I guess I'd like to see, in terms of our incremental approach, a focus on making sure that we've got that stability, investing in our ability to fill the vacancies that we have already funded, doing those two things, and then maybe seeing how cannabis turns out as that starts to come online before we're looking at adding more positions. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Mayor Stevens, may I offer some comments in response?
Always.
Thank you. So thank you for your comments, Councilmember Reynolds. I was taking notes as you were speaking. So I think that many of the issues that you're raising are excellent, and they are absolutely part and parcel of what we're bringing to this evening. So when we're talking, the fascinating thing with government is that we tend to look at it as a business that's providing services, but then there are other things that get provided by other people or in other ways. So when we talk about the climate resiliency and our climate adaptation plan, it's people that we need to do that. And so we need recruiters to recruit the right people to put that plan together, unless, of course, we hire a consultant, but we'll be paying $200, $300 an hour, and then that expertise isn't in-house. And what do we do when we want to maintain our climate adaptation plan, or we want to pass that on throughout the organization? This is the very essence of what we're bringing to you this evening. There is no other way that government provides services but for the people. And so we're not bringing forward, but actually Raja has requested someone to help Salem in particular to be able to put that together. Jennifer has 7 vacancies right now. She has 4 planner vacancies that we cannot fill because those positions are 20% below the market. And so it'd be very exciting for someone to work on a plan, but not when they're going to get a pay cut. They will not transfer, and we can't get them here no matter how much we beg and plead. That is why we're bringing this to you. So the hard-to-fill positions are literally hard to fill. That is why we have 54 vacancies, because we either are not paying at the right compensation level or we don't have enough staff to make that happen. We can't deliver on all of these excellent and exciting projects that you're talking about without the right people in the right positions at the right level of pay. When we talk about crime and fighting crime, and we talk about this new 911 manager, it'll be a civilian that can help both police and fire, so we can get a lieutenant that's sworn back fighting crime instead of running a 911 communication center. When we're talking about reducing crime scene investigations performed by a part-timer, so that we want that part-timer to become full-time, that's gonna free up another police officer or two to go back and fight crime. When we're talking about alleviating the heavy workload in the crime scene unit associated with discovery requests, again, that's helping to get sworn personnel back on the street. When we're talking about climate adaptation, resiliency, drought tolerance, and water conservancy, and the fact that we're going to be in dire straits in California when it comes to the water crisis, let's upgrade that emergency services administrator position to a manager position so that we have stability there. We can retain the excellent person that we have now that's done active shooter trainings for you, has helped us throughout this whole pandemic, so that we don't have to start fresh with somebody new. And if that person did choose to have another opportunity, we could recruit somebody of that same caliber. We're talking about the same things. Our goals are aligned. There is no way to achieve what we're talking about without that. This is precisely why we're bringing this forward. And so it sounds to me like we need to do just a little bit better job of connecting these dots for you, because they're seeming like they're different or conflicting or competing initiatives, but it's all aligned, it's all tied in. We cannot fill 54 of these positions without the staff to recruit and fill those positions, while others are retiring and leaving, either for other jobs or because of the silver tsunami and the demographics. We can't do that without the additional staff, and we can't do it without compensating folks, and we can't keep churning part-timers to do this excellent work, which we need for stability and to achieve all these goals that we've been talking about. And so this is what we need to do what you're talking about. And we're clearly going to have to put in some additional elements there to make that very, very clear and compelling for you. We want you to feel comfortable with it, but this is precisely why we're bringing this forward.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going. Good study session. We're adjourned.